Well, after 6 years, it looks like it's finally over. The legal battle between Gibson guitars and Dean guitars, which started in 2019, looks to have had one of the final nails in its coffin. And Dean lost. There are some loose ends, though, which are very interesting that I'm going to cover towards the end of this video. But if you're unfamiliar with this case, because it's been a big one and has huge impacts on the guitar industry as a whole, well, let me give you a brief-ish overview. In November 2018, Gibson was acquired by an investment firm called KKR, and with that acquisition, the leadership of Gibson received an entire overhaul. And with that, the decision to become more litigious than ever became apparent rather quickly.
Play authentic.
Gibson released a now infamous video of them threatening a whole lot of people in the guitar industry.
We want you to know that you've been warned. We're looking out, and we're here to protect our iconic legacy.
And soon after, they made true of their claims by initiating a lawsuit against Dean guitars for trademark infringement. The main claims we're talking about are Gibson's trademark body shapes for the V, the Explorer, as well as the ES335 and the SG. There were some other claims as well, but the big ones are those shapes. In fact, the biggest ones that we're really talking about are the V and the Explorer. But all of these trademarks is what this case really revolved around. The reason that it was so interesting, though, was it was a little bit different from the usual trademark infringement cases that you see in the guitar world, because it revolved Dean guitars who'd been making Vs and Zs, which is their Flying V and Explorer shaped guitars, since the 1970s, and Gibson hadn't really stepped in to stop them for decades. Why this is important is that in many cases, if you don't defend your trademark, you can lose it. The primary word, though, is can. But to add on to that, Gibson lost the trademark for the Flying V in the European courts, so it's understandable why Dean felt that they had some strong arguments. Now, this legal battle went on for years, and if we're being honest about it, it was quite boring. But it ended in 2022 with a win for Gibson, meaning that Dean couldn't continue to make and sell the V and Z shapes, which had become a staple for the company. However, there was a glimmer of hope for Dean, as there was a chance to appeal the decision, and they did just that, because initially Gibson had blocked Dean from using evidence predating the 1990s, and after all, with Dean making the guitars since the 70s and a whole number of brands making guitars that looked similar or infringed on Gibson's trademarks during that time, Dean felt that it was important evidence to admit to the court, and the appeals court thought so too, and granted a retrial. Gibson's win ruling during this time was reversed, and it meant that Dean could start again selling Vs and Zs and so on. And they did just that. They announced for 2025 at the NAMM show in January a new line of guitars, with about 38% of that new line being Vs and Zs. This was a short-lived victory for Dean, though, as a little over a week ago it was announced that Gibson won again. Dean lost. This is Gibson's statement. Today, the federal court decided by jury once again to uphold Gibson, the iconic global instrument brand's long-established and well-recognized trademarks of its innovative and iconic Flying V, Explorer, and SG guitar shapes, finding that these trademarks are valid and not generic, and the defendants were guilty of both infringement and counterfeiting. Gibson has secured another major legal victory in its ongoing commitment to protecting its iconic designs. In the retrial of Gibson v. Armadillo Enterprises, Dean Guitars, a Texas federal jury has once again upheld Gibson's exclusive rights to its legendary guitar shapes and trademarks, in recognition of the harm caused by Dean's infringement. The jury's decision reinforces the validity and strength of Gibson's intellectual property rights, confirming that its guitar shapes, including the Flying V, Explorer, and SG, remain protected trademarks. Gibson is turning its focus to the future, continuing to invest in innovation, craftsmanship, and the next generation of groundbreaking guitars. They didn't win everything, though. The big loss for Gibson was the ES335 trademark. The court found it to be generic and therefore not trademarkable, which means that I'd be expecting to see a lot more ES335 shaped guitars on the market relatively soon. But that doesn't mean that things are set in stone, because Gibson still do have the chance to appeal this decision, and they intend to do so, as stated in a statement for Guitar.com. Dean also issued a statement on the loss. Today's decision in our trial with Gibson is a complex jury verdict. We are reviewing all of our options. We are pleased that the jury found that our Evolution headstock does not infringe on Gibson's Dovewing headstock, and that the ES335 body shape is generic. With the award of just $1 in damages, it is clear that lawsuits like this in the guitar industry are just not worth the time and expense, and we hope that in moving forward, parties will be able to work out their differences in a more efficient manner. It could have been worse for Dean. After all, they only had to pay $1 of damages to Gibson, but that's not really where the damage lies, is it? No doubt they had to pay a costly sum for 6 years of a legal battle. And then again, you also have to factor in, what have they been able to sell during that time? After this ruling, the damage that Dean has sustained is hard to miss. Their new for 2025 lineup has just lost 38% of the guitars that they've released. That has to be a hit. But here's the bit that I haven't seen anybody else talk about. It still could get worse for Dean. You see, Gibson went all in on Dean during this lawsuit, and things are still yet to fully pan out. It seems that because Dean challenged some of Gibson's trademarks, Gibson sought to return the favour, and are petitioning to have 2 of Dean's trademarks cancelled. Now, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of things. All the information is all linked in the description if you really want to dive into this. But in the briefest and least complicated way I can make it, Gibson are petitioning to cancel the trademarks for the Dean razorback shape and the ML shape. You see, Dean haven't just been battling Gibson during this time, but they've also had a legal issue with the Dimebag estate, with court cases about trademarks, royalties, and so on. And during this legal battle, Dean pulled all the Dimebag guitars they had for sale. They weren't allowed to sell them. They didn't have permission from the Dimebag estate. It was, again, complicated. But because they pulled that, that meant that there were no razorbacks for sale for a few years. And because of this, Gibson are using it as an argument to say that Dean have effectively abandoned that mark because they haven't and don't make that shape. And they haven't done for at least a few years now. But I think by far the most interesting argument that Gibson are making to try and dismiss these trademarks or these shapes is this. On February 5th, 2024, Gibson and Dean participated in oral arguments before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Counsel Ronald Beanstalk delivered oral arguments on behalf of Dean. Mr. Beanstalk is also attorney of record for the 989 mark. While presenting Dean's position to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, Mr. Beanstalk stated to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals Dean's belief that guitar body shapes cannot function as trademarks. This was Dean's argument for why they should be allowed to make V and Explorer shaped guitars. While Gibson admittedly disputes Dean's position regarding the protectability of a body shape, a fact that is supported by the jury's finding in Gibson Brands vs. Armadillo Distribution Enterprises, that Gibson's body shape registrations are protected and valid, Dean made judicial admissions before the Fifth Circuit Court that Concordia committed fraud on the US Trademark Office when it claimed its razorback body shape acts as a source identifier. Nothing in this petition for cancellation should be construed to mean Gibson believes its body shapes do not act as a source identifier, or construed to mean Gibson believes its body shapes registrations are not valid and protectable. The allegations in this petition are based on Dean's attorney of record's judicial admission to the Fifth Circuit regarding how Dean views its body shapes, including the razorback guitar body shape, subject to the 989 mark, not acting as a source identifier. More specifically, Mr. Beanstalk stated that when guitar players are identifying or buying guitars, that, quote, guitar players may look at the features of the guitar. They look at the features of the guitars, they look at the finishes, they look at what's on the guitar, they also look at the headstock to know who makes it. Mr. Beanstalk stated further that, quote, guitar players may prefer a certain guitar shape, but like I said, they buy always by brand. Mr. Beanstalk states, quote, nobody buys by shape. People buy by brand. You don't go to the mall, to the shape store, you go to the guitar shop. Again, Mr. Beanstalk emphasized to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, quote, people want to buy by brands. They don't buy by shape. Most poignantly, Mr. Beanstalk claimed, quote, Body shapes do not act as source identifiers. Gibson are very cleverly using Dean's own arguments against them. Gibson have even gone so far as to accuse Dean of fraud, because based on their own legal arguments, Dean don't believe that a shape should be or could be trademarked, and yet they trademarked their own body shapes. Gibson are asserting that they lied to the trademark office in order to get these trademarked shapes, because, after all, based on Dean's arguments, they don't believe that those should be trademarks. These two trademark cases are still both ongoing, and I've linked them in the description if you want to take a closer look, but these really could result in the cancellation of 2 of Dean's trademarks. And Dean have already taken a significant hit from their battle with Gibson. Losing more might really, really hurt them, especially when you've got competitors waiting in the wings like Dime Guitars, who would happily make ML and razorback shapes and probably sell a decent amount of them too. At the bare minimum, I think all of this is very interesting and could have a greater effect on the overall guitar industry. Anyway, that's all for now. Like the video if you liked it. Consider subscribing, because who else told you about the trademark stuff? And, well, yeah, if you liked it, maybe I'll see you next time. Bye bye!